Hello, my friends. Welcome back to English Heritale. This is your time to relax and listen. I'm so glad you are here with me today. Take a slow breath, let your shoulders drop, and let your mind travel with me for a little while. Today we are going to talk about a young man really because he never lived long enough to grow old. A man who left his home at the edge of Greece and did not stop moving until he had crossed deserts, mountains, and rivers most people in his world had never even heard of. A man who built an empire stretching from the shores of the Mediterranean to the edge of India. He did all of this before he turned 33 years old. His name was Alexander. History remembers him as Alexander the Great. Close your eyes for a moment, breathe slowly, and let us travel together back to a kingdom in the north of Greece. A land of mountains and horses and fierce warrior pride. A kingdom called Macedonia, and the year was 356 before the birth of Christ. Alexander was born into a palace, not a small house. His father was Philip II, the king of Macedonia, a tough and brilliant military leader who had spent his whole reign turning a rough mountain kingdom into the strongest military power in the Greek world. His mother was Olympias, a fierce and proud woman who believed, and told her son often, that he was descended from gods. From Achilles on one side, from Hercules on the other. Imagine growing up hearing that. Imagine carrying that weight, that expectation, from the time you could first understand words. Alexander did not have an ordinary childhood. He was raised to rule. And his father, wanting the very best mind in Greece to shape his son's thinking, sent for a tutor. Not just any tutor. He sent for the philosopher Aristotle, the same student of Plato we have spoken of before in this very podcast. For 3 years, in a quiet garden, Aristotle taught young Alexander philosophy, science, literature, and medicine. He gave him a love of Homer, poetry so deep that some historians say Alexander kept a copy of it under his pillow for the rest of his life, even on military campaigns far from home. So picture this: a boy raised by a warrior father and a fierce, mythic mother, educated by the greatest philosopher of his age. Two completely different forces pulling at the same young mind. The sword and the book. The myth and the reason. Both shaped him. Neither one fully won. There is a story from when Alexander was just a boy of 12. A story that tells you almost everything you need to know about who he would become. A horse trader brought a wild, powerful stallion to Philip's court. The horse was magnificent but completely unmanageable. It reared, kicked. No rider could stay on its back. The king's men tried and failed, one after another, and Philip decided the horse was too dangerous and not worth buying. Alexander, watching quietly, said he could ride it. His father laughed, but Alexander insisted. He walked toward the horse slowly, calmly, and noticed something the grown men had missed. The horse was afraid of its own shadow moving on the ground in front of it. So Alexander turned the horse to face the sun, removing the shadow from its sight. Then he spoke to it softly. Then he mounted it, and he rode it perfectly in front of the entire stunned court. His father watched and, according to the story, wept with pride. He told his son that Macedonia was too small a kingdom for him. That horse, later named Bucephalus, became Alexander's companion for the rest of his life, carried into nearly every battle he ever fought. When Alexander was 20 years old, his father was assassinated, stabbed at a wedding celebration by one of his own bodyguards. The kingdom was suddenly without a king, surrounded by enemies who smelled weakness, watching to see if this young, unproven son could actually hold what his father had built. Alexander did not hesitate. He moved quickly and ruthlessly to secure his throne, putting down rebellions in the Greek cities that thought a 20-year-old boy would be easy to overthrow. Within 2 years, he had not only secured Macedonia. He had begun to dream of something far larger. He looked east, toward the massive Persian Empire, the largest and richest power in the known world. Most reasonable people would have called this madness. Persia had more soldiers, more wealth, more land than Macedonia could ever imagine matching. But Alexander did not think the way most reasonable people thought. In 334 before the birth of Christ, he crossed into Asia with an army of roughly 40,000 men. 40,000, against an empire that could field hundreds of thousands when fully gathered. He won his first major battle quickly, then another, and then, at a place called Issus, he faced the Persian king himself, Darius III, commanding a vastly larger force. Alexander won again, so completely that Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his own mother, wife, and children, whom Alexander treated, by the standards of his time, with notable respect rather than cruelty. City after city fell before him, or in many cases opened their gates without a fight at all, having heard what happened to those who resisted. He marched into Egypt, where the priests crowned him as a son of the god Ammonius. He founded a city there, naming it after himself. Alexandria. It still exists today, one of the great cities of the modern world, carrying his name more than 2,000 years later. Then came the final, decisive confrontation with Darius, at a place called Gaugamela, where the Persian king gathered what may have been the largest army ever assembled to that point in history. Alexander, badly outnumbered, used discipline, speed, and a brilliant reading of the battlefield to shatter the Persian lines completely. Darius fled once more, and the empire that had stood for 2 centuries effectively collapsed. Alexander was now, technically, the ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen. And still, he did not stop. He pushed further east, into lands the Greeks had only heard of in rumors and legends, into what is now Afghanistan, into India. His soldiers, exhausted after years of marching, finally refused to go any further. At a river called the Hyphasis, his own army, men who had followed him through deserts and over mountains and into the teeth of impossible battles, simply stopped walking. They had given him everything. They had nothing left to give. Alexander, for perhaps the first time in his life, had to accept a limit he did not choose for himself. He turned back. The journey home was harder than almost any battle he had fought. His army crossed a brutal desert where thousands of soldiers, who had survived years of warfare, died of thirst and exhaustion. Alexander himself, it is said, refused water that was brought to him in the desert when there was not enough for his men, pouring it out onto the sand in front of them rather than drink while his soldiers suffered. He eventually settled in Babylon, one of the great ancient cities, planning new campaigns, new roads, new cities, his mind apparently never resting even after everything his body had already endured. But in the summer of 323 before the birth of Christ, he fell ill after a period of fever, and within days he was dead. He was 32 years old. When his generals asked him, as he lay dying, to whom he left his enormous empire, he is said to have answered simply, to the strongest. It was, in some ways, exactly the kind of answer his whole life had been building toward. A man who believed that nothing should be inherited that could instead be earned. And here, my friends, is where I want to sit with you for one quiet moment. Alexander's empire did not survive him for long. Within years, his generals tore it apart, fighting each other for the pieces. The unified world he had built collapsed almost as quickly as it had risen. In that sense, his story is very different from a thinker like Socrates or Aristotle, whose ideas only grew stronger after their deaths. Alexander's physical empire crumbled. But something else did not crumble. He spread Greek language, Greek learning, and Greek culture across 3 continents, planting cities and ideas in places that would carry them for centuries afterward. The very world that Aristotle's philosophy and Greek science would later travel through, reaching as far as India and back again, was a world Alexander's marching feet had first opened. What is the lesson we carry from this story? Perhaps it is this. Alexander was taught, as a boy, by one of the greatest minds in human history, a man who believed that a good life was a life of balance, of moderation, of reasoned self-control. And Alexander absorbed his teacher's love of knowledge, his curiosity, his hunger to understand the world. But the restraint, the moderation, the knowing when enough is enough, that lesson never fully took hold. He conquered nearly everything around him. The one thing he could never quite conquer was the relentless hunger inside himself. And for you, walking your own path through the English language, there is something worth sitting with here. Ambition is a powerful gift. The drive to keep going, to cross the next river, to learn the next word, to push further than feels comfortable, that drive can carry you to places you never imagined reaching. But Alexander's story reminds us, gently, that knowing where to rest matters too. You do not have to conquer the whole language in a single day. You are allowed to stop at the river, breathe, and recognize how far you have already come. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for walking this road with English Heritale. If this story moved you, if it gave you one new word or one new thought, please leave a comment below. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me what you felt. And I will be here, waiting with another story, another journey, another quiet window into the world and into the English language. Until next time, my friends, rest well, listen well, and know when to rest, even in the middle of the journey.